Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for November 2018. I'm Adam Koralik, your host. Thank you very much for joining me. If you've never listened to this before, this is a Patreon podcast for my Patreon. There's a link in the description. And if you want it, you can get it right away as soon as the podcast comes out. However, you don't have to do that. You can get the podcast at the end of the month for free on my YouTube channel. There's just a time delay of a few weeks. So first of all, if you want to do that, thank you. Appreciate it. There's this as well as other things. You can actually come up with subjects for the podcast. You can get shout outs. You can even be on the podcast if you want to. But all the information on that is at patreon.com/Adam Koralik. So, that out of the way, what is the point of this podcast? Well, we do a lot of subjects here. Specifically, I'll just kind of pick a bunch. And again, if Patreon backers have picked any, then they can choose that as well. But in this case, we're just going to do a bunch here. This is going to be kind of a power round thing, because this month, at the time I record this anyway, there isn't really much that's like, you know, to be honest, something I need to really go on about for a really long time. So I kind of have just kind of a lot of power round subjects here. So let's see how this goes. The first thing, though, is, first of all, I hope you guys have been having a good month. Depending on when you're hearing this, I hope you voted if you're an American. I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving again if you're an American. Hopefully you didn't get killed by Black Friday if you're an American. And if you're the rest of the world, I hope you just had a kick-ass month, dude. But yeah, so let's start off the first thing. So the last thing I did right before I have done this podcast, I went to Blackpool in the United Kingdom. I went there for a convention called Play Expo Blackpool. That was really fun. I got to do a couple of panels, got to meet up with a bunch of British YouTubers, as well as my buddy Ben. Slopes, Daniel Slopes, I got to hang out with him. Really cool guy. Just chatting, got to meet a bunch of people, and I got some pickups and stuff like that, which you guys will see in the next playload at the time this comes out, which is really cool. And I had a really good time over there. It was really, really fun to get to, of course, go back to the UK. But yeah, beyond that, not much else to say that, without, I guess, seeing some footage. So you kind of save that for the next playload when I can actually show you guys some of the pickups and stuff I got. It was cool though. I got to pick up a bunch of like exclusive games that I had been looking for, because that was actually the first time I had been to like a retro gaming convention in Europe. I had been to other conventions, but not specifically for that purpose. So the dealer room was better in that sense. So it was a good place to pick some stuff up. But you guys will see that later. The other thing I did, pretty much the day after I got back from the UK, I went up to Toronto, Canada, for a couple of charity streams. What I was mostly up there for was that Xbox Canada was doing a stream for Extra Life, which is a charity where basically kids who are dying of like cancer, you can help raise money for them to buy them like, video game systems and things like that to get their minds off of the fact that frankly they have cancer. It's a good cause, and just to help kids basically. So I was asked, if I could do it, and they didn't bring me up or anything. I had, a whole bunch of miles I was perfectly willing to spend to go do that, because again, it's a good cause. And my buddy Scott, the Canadian, let me stay with him, so lodging wasn't a problem. So I doubt any of you saw it, because it was mostly only promoted in Canada. But it was something I did with Shane Lewis, Rerez TV, my buddy, as well as Scott, the Canadian. We hopped on their stream for about an hour, which was really fun to do. And we raised a few $100, which I was pretty proud of that. Later that same evening, we also did another charity stream, again for Extra Life, specifically for Crunchyroll, like the anime distribution thing. We did that at a different location, and I don't know how much we raised for that, because they didn't have like an active counter on the screen. I hope we raised something. But it was the same basic idea. So yeah, that was really like the reason I went to Toronto. But because, I hadn't been there in a year, I love going up to Canada, and because, I was spending my own miles, there was no, it didn't really matter, like when I went and when I came back. So free lodging and all that stuff. So I hope that, that helped. That's all I really wanted to do, was just help people out. But then I could also, enjoy my time in Canada. So kind of worked out in both ways. Didn't really pick much of anything up there though, but you guys will see I got one thing, and you'll see it in the next playload. But yeah, that was pretty much all that really was, and I hope some of you out there got to see it. I know I recognized a couple of people in that Xbox Canada chat from at least from my Twitter. So if you ever want to see, like, I do a lot of random stuff like that. You'll be surprised where you see me pop up. You can kind of keep a handle on it if you follow me on like Instagram or Twitter or any of that stuff. I also, while I was up there, since I was hanging out with Shane Lewis, Re-Res TV, I went to his studio and we did a live stream up there for my channel, which is on this channel now. And you can just enjoy that if you want to. One of the things we did with that was crazy is as you guys know, I travel quite a bit. I get sent to a lot of stuff, or in this case, brought myself, but I get sent to a lot of stuff. And Shane has an affinity for junk food. Like first time I ever met him, the second thing he ever said to me was like the entire story of how Hydrox cookies came into existence. Like, the dude loves junk food and respects junk food. I respect junk food, but I don't really eat it. But I love the concept of it. Like Snickers that are a different flavor that only came out in like one country or something like that. So I would have a habit of picking them up for him, like in all these random places. So last year I did that, and then we did this live stream where I just gave him all this stuff, and then I was like, all right, now we're going to Japan, and now we're going to Europe, and blah, blah, blah. So I did the same thing this year, and it was much bigger. It was insane. So I did all that stuff, plus, of course, the Q&A and all that kind of stuff. I also filmed one of his episodes of Hot Take with him about the what games you would hypothetically like to see from the Dreamcast appear on the Switch. So all these videos exist out there if you're interested in any of that stuff. But yeah, that's just kind of what I've been up to. The next thing that's coming up for me, although at the time the majority of you hear this will already be over, I'm going back to Japan. I can't say why, but I'm going back to Japan for a few days. So that'll be fun, but more information on that will come out in due time. That's really all I can say at the moment. I wish I could say more, but yeah, at the moment, that's all I can say. But it'll be cool. It'll be cool. I'm looking forward to going back there. That'll be fun. And hopefully unfortunately this time it's very short turnover. Like I'll fly in, then the next day I got to do the thing. The next day I think I have like one day to do whatever I want, and the next day I fly home. So it's really short, which is unfortunate, but hopefully I can at least pick up something cool somewhere. That'd be good. So yeah, that's kind of it for that stuff. So let's move on to the next subject. Now this one is odd because this one, at the time I record this, is very speculative. However, I do know that there's probably a huge information dump around the corner, so I'm hesitant on how much to talk about this. So this is with regards to Microsoft's Project Scarlett. Now, Project Scarlett, at the time I record this, there's not much known. The presumption is that Xbox is working on multiple new platforms, most likely streaming-based, possibly new home console-based, which I would hope for, because I'm a physical media guy. I like my real consoles with discs or some sort of cart-like option. Streaming is not my thing. I don't enjoy it. So I'm hopeful that whatever the next Xbox iteration is, that it continues that trend. Although I am not naive, I acknowledge that is inevitable. It's just a matter of when. So I say this because at the time I record this, I know there's some big announcement they're about to roll out, which might include a ton of information about this particular situation. So it's kind of, I think, a little silly of me to speculate on it. So that's really all I'm going to say for now, other than I hope whatever this announcement was exciting. And maybe we'll talk more about that later, possibly on the Xbox One anniversary video. We'll see. Which, keep in mind, that's probably around the corner. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Oh yeah, this is a killer one because I'd love to speculate, but what's the point? You know what I mean? Like, the information dump is right around the corner, so probably. So let's just screw it. Let's just move on. The other two things, I want to talk about a couple of games. Fallout 76 beta, and Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, at the time I, again, record this, the beta is all that's out of Fallout 76, but the final version's out there. Fallout 76, I remember I was at Bethesda's conference in E3 when they announced this, and it looked really cool. It didn't, but I'm going to be honest, it didn't look like my kind of game, only because I'm kind of an old school gamer, obviously, since I sit here and talk about physical media and all that kind of stuff. But while multiplayer is cool, I've never been a multiplayer gamer. I've never really enjoyed that type of thing. I've always enjoyed single-player gaming experiences, especially offline ones. I don't really like being dependent upon servers and things like that. So Fallout 76 is one of those things where I look at it and I go, That looks really neat. I'm never going to play that because it's just not in my wheelhouse, even though I fully acknowledge that it's well crafted. In fact, we've been doing a lot of it on my other channel on Game Society Pimps. We've been playing Fallout 76, and everyone seems to really love it in most ways, although there are some issues and drawbacks that come with the game, mostly because you're dependent upon multiple people for certain things to trigger, whereas standalone Fallout games didn't have that issue because it was the entire universe revolved around your singular character. The result of this is a lot of downtime of not really being sure what to do. Things like crafting and things like that are problematic when everyone has to do it. But whatever. That's whatever. I know people are really loving it so far. I'm very curious to see how it fully plays out upon major release. When it gets out, because right now you're in the honeymoon period where it's new to people and it's a beta, so that you're giving a lot of leeway. But when it's really out there, like what kind of impact is it going to have on people? How much will they really like it? And my litmus test for that is my buddy Aaron, who is a Fallout whore. Absolutely loves that series. Well, specifically 3 in New Vegas. He wasn't a huge fan of 4, although he looked forward to it forever. And 76 he's been playing the shit out of. But even he's kind of saying, eh. But again, that's a beta, So I'm curious to see what he'll think of it in the final run, and I'm curious to think what you guys will as well. But if you haven't heard of it, there's another thing I want to throw out there that it got a lot of attention, so you probably already do know, but in case you don't. Fallout New Vegas has a fan-made expansion, or not even expansion, like a fan-made like entirely new game called Fallout New California that just came out. It can only be done on PC through a modding system. I don't believe it's Nexus mods. I believe there's like a whole, it has like its own unique thing. But it's this big, like it seems like an expansion, but it's literally an entirely new game. They spent 7 years making this thing. We've actually been doing videos on it on my other channel. If you didn't know that it was a fan-made thing, you really would never figure that one out. It's actually very impressive. It's essentially an entirely new game that feels like right up there. Granted, it looks a little out of date because it's using the same engine as Fallout New Vegas, but that doesn't really matter. It still seems to be a pretty solid game. We've been enjoying it so far. So, if you're big into Fallout, and Fallout 76 isn't quite the Fallout you want, granted, you have to be a PC gamer, but if you are, you might want to look into Fallout New California. You might really enjoy that. There's a couple of catches, like you have to own Fallout New Vegas, or at least let's say you have to have it in your Steam account or whatever. And you have to have a pretty basic understanding of how mods work. But if you do all that, you can have this totally new game called Fallout New California, which you might really enjoy. The other big game that dropped recently, that as all of you know, is Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, the thing with Red Dead Redemption 2 is that I haven't played it yet, but I have seen it played, most notably at my buddy Shane's house. Shane, as we just talked about, Re-Rest. So Shane has this like amazing TV, 4K TV that like the blacks on it are crushed like to a ridiculous extent. It almost feels like the TV is off. Like it's an OLED. It's beautiful, and he's running it with an Xbox One X, and that game was very much Xbox One X enhanced and with high dynamic range. It looked ridiculous. It looked absolutely sick. Like how it was the first time in a while I'd looked at a game and I went, damn. Like I was just impressed by how good it looked. And gameplay wise, it seemed really, really pretty cool. The thing is, I never really got around to the previous Red Dead games. I know most people seem to ignore Red Dead Revolver, but that made me really think I wanted to pick that game up because it just looks so damn impressive. I know that was another one that, again, on my channel, Game Society Pimps, we've actually been doing a lot of videos on that one as well. Because that's another game that, historically anyway, our team has always enjoyed, was the original Red Dead Redemption, which technically was a sequel, although everyone seems to forget Red Dead Revolver ever existed. It's impressive too. And it's funny because, without dropping any names, I've talked to people at Take-Two who told me essentially that, like GTA 5... they never expected it to be what it is, that's like common knowledge. That's not any great secret. GTA 5 was meant to be just another GTA game that came out, made its money, and then probably faded into the ether. But GTA 5 has been consistently financially successful and relevant for like 5 years, which is insane. So with Red Dead, part of their business model was to follow exactly what GTA 5 did, which was to put it out, on only, at the time it was the Xbox 360 and PS3, not PC. Then intentionally hold off for like a year and then re-release it on newer platforms as well as PC, and then slowly roll out online mode after the single player campaign and all this other stuff. Like, they're going to follow that model pretty much as perfectly as they can. Granted, we're not having new consoles next year as far as we know, but don't be surprised if they do the same type of thing. You might see some, I'm just purely guessing here, don't be surprised if you see some sort of Red Dead Redemption 2 version on the Switch, either through a very watered down build of it, or through that, a streaming attempt like they kind of did with like Resident Evil 7. Granted, that didn't work out too well, but don't be surprised if you see something like that. That would be my guess. And then to introduce some sort of online mode with massive currency relevance, the way they did with GTA 5. They're trying to do that, and to their credit, they've been successful. Like, I read somewhere that Red Dead Redemption made more in 3 days than Avengers Infinity War made in its entire theatrical run. Now, granted, they're different, things. One's a video game, one's a movie. But think about it. Avengers Infinity War is like one of the biggest movies ever. The idea that Red Dead Redemption somehow made more money than it in just 3 days is insane. Now, that's just what I heard. I don't know if that's actually true, because that seems insane. But then again, I do remember when GTA 5 came out, and it was like the same story. It was ridiculous how popular and how much money that thing generated. So, yeah. Props to Rockstar and Take-Two for their success over there. Congratulations. Same with Bethesda. Good job with, making some money out of Fallout. But, yeah. We'll see. I wonder which one will ultimately sell better. If I had to guess, I'd say probably Red Dead Redemption 2. But we'll see. I also bet you that Red Dead Redemption 2 will have some sort of re-release next year, maybe with all DLC, or something like that. But I think they're just going to try and stick with that model as best as they possibly can. So there you go. Next up. So do you guys remember the ill-fated PT, the playable teaser for Silent Hills? This was a game made by Hideo Kojima, and I believe Guillermo del Toro was involved. And the whole idea was they were going to remake Silent Hill and like completely take the franchise over. And it was going to be a PS4 exclusive, at least for a while. And Konami released this demo of the game called just PT. Now, eventually, Hideo Kojima would be ousted from Konami under the not nicest of circumstances. Silent Hills, the game, was completely canceled as a project, and the demo of it, PT, was removed from servers, which meant if you deleted the demo, you could no longer reacquire it. That's been a thing for years. However, if you were one of the lucky few who had downloaded PT and hadn't touched it, it was still sitting on your on your PS4, and even your hard drive was still working and all that stuff, you were fine to be able to keep replaying it. It's just that if you ever deleted it, it's gone for eternity. Supposedly, I've been reading that supposedly Konami intends to possibly release some sort of update that would actually brick PT from working entirely. Now, why they would spend the development dollars and time and resources to do this is beyond me. It seems like just a big dickish move. As of now, as far as I know, this hasn't actually gone into effect, and hopefully this isn't actually true, because PT was a pretty cool little demo. It has been remade by fans, PC only, and if you want to be able to play the basic experience of what it was, it is out there. However, I believe Konami's been going after people for that as well. Maybe that's what triggered it. I don't know. Maybe they would have just left it alone if it weren't for the fan remakes. It's hard to say. I don't think Konami would be too quick to comment on all of this, but yeah, that sucks to me. It's one of those things that doesn't really surprise me, though. You have to remember, at the end of the day, digital gaming is not property. It is convenience. You're trading your right of ownership for convenience, which is your choice. But you have to remember, they have the power to digitally, take away your right to play anything. And I know you might be saying, well, PT was free, so who really cares? again, digital games can be things like the Simpsons arcade game that came out for the 360, or Ubisoft's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Time Reshelled, things like that. Things where you put down money, but eventually they took the games down for licensing reasons, and you can no longer re-download them, even though you quote-unquote owned them. And I say this not to preach physical media only. I say it only to make the point that I wish people understood that. Like, just because you can download it right now doesn't mean you can download it forever. So if you're going to argue that downloaded content is property, you have to argue that what they do is theft. And if you argue what they do is theft, then technically you can bring them up on criminal charges. But no one's doing that because it's not. And the reason it's not is because it's not property. It's a license agreement. That's what you've signed on to when you give them the money, which means you don't own it. But you do own a physical disc. Now, whether or not that disc in of itself is mostly useless these days because it requires patches and all that other shit, that is another argument to have entirely. I don't dispute that. But you do at least physically own the plastic. You don't own the file. If you're following me there. So that's just me saying, I'm warning you, just, if you want to have if you want to do everything digitally, that's 100% your choice. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, remember, you don't own it. And if you don't care about that, that's totally cool. But yeah, let's move on from that. This one is going to be very short, despite what you would expect. You would think I'd probably talk about this for a while. So a lot of people have been asking me about this, and I've been kind of ignoring it. So not too long ago, Digital Foundry put out a video pertaining to the Shenmue Remaster, as they were dubbing it. And you can watch that video if you want to see. I can't discuss this. I'd love to, but I signed an NDA with Sega a while back that prevents me from really being able to acknowledge it much. So all I'll say is that yes, if you want to go see that video, you can do that. But anything else, unfortunately, I'm not permitted to say. I just kind of wanted to acknowledge publicly that I'm not really able to say anything. So now you know why I haven't done a whole video on it or anything like that. I can't. So we'll have to leave it at that. So with that in mind, let's move on to shout-outs. All right. So thank you to everybody who has been listening so far. And, of course, I want to thank everyone on Patreon. But there are also Patreon backers who have donated to the appropriate level in which they get a shout-out. So I'll just shout out your name, man. And thank you so much for donating. You've helped to make not only this podcast possible, but to keep the channel going. Really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. So all of you, Justin Webb, Jonas Pachonka, Corey Marsh, Jesse Perez, Happy Gaming House, Rob Janos, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Eric Peralez, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. Thank you guys. You're all awesome. And again, if anybody at any time wants to sign up on my Patreon, I really would appreciate it. It's helpful. Let's just put it that way. It's really helpful to keep the channel afloat and to keep it all going. So once again, thank you again to Justin Webb, Jonas Pachonka, Corey Marsh, Jesse Perez, Happy Gaming House, Rob Janos, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Eric Peralez, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. You guys all rock. And even if you didn't, donate, even if you aren't part of that, the shout outs or anything, and you're just listening, I still appreciate that too. Seriously. Thank you very much. But moving on to our next subject, the PlayStation Classic. It finally got its game list, which I believe was 20 titles. And the general consensus around this seems to be disappointment. Now, I need to get this. I've said this before, but I'll say it again for those who are new, possibly. I don't care about these re-release consoles. I've never cared about clone consoles since its entire conception. Where, those, even the Yobo, Nintendo on a chip bullshit. I've never cared about that. Or even when Nintendo and Sony themselves are doing these little emulator boxes, I've never cared. There's a handful of exceptions in the clone console universe that I think are interesting. The first one ever that was interesting to me was the Atari Flashback 2. Only because the guy who made it made an original Atari 2600 from scratch, as if he was going to make one now, out of brand new parts and everything. He did it as properly as you can, and even left soldering points on there for modders just so you could put a cartridge slot in. And the only reason that was important, other than just having a newer machine that wasn't as out of date, it had composite video, which was a brand new thing for Atari 2600 to enjoy for that community. So I respected that. I respected the analog NT because of it being an NES, like a perfect NES, granted an expensive one, but perfect. And the AVS for being essentially exactly the same thing, but also again for the NES. But those are the exceptions; they're not the rule. Now I know people love their PlayStation, or sorry, their SNES Classic and their NES Classic and all that stuff. Those are just little emulator boxes. They don't matter to me, and I see why people do. I mean, again, this goes back to the whole digital thing. Like, the argument there is, hey man, it doesn't take up much space. It has all the games I ever really want to play on it. If I really want to, I can mod the thing and play as many of the games I want. I don't need all these like big hunks of plastic around. I get that argument entirely. As long as you get mine, which is I don't value that. I value actually having stuff around. Now, I can see why people don't. I get that too. So I just wanted to throw that out there that like PlayStation Classic, like I don't have a dog in that fight. It doesn't matter to me what's on it. I would not own it even if it consisted of the 20 of my favorite games of all time. I still would not get it. It means nothing to me. That said, to people who it does mean something to, the list of games on there is highly questionable. Most people are pointing at Rainbow Six as like, why the hell is that game on there? It really wasn't very well known as even being a PlayStation title. While other games seem to just be missing, ones that people do really associate with that particular platform, namely the Crash Bandicoots and the Spyros and Twisted Metal 2, most notably. You know, that I'm sure boiled down to just licensing. And you know who was on board. So you know Ubisoft was a big proponent of this thing. I mean, they put Rayman on there as well, so it made sense to get a couple of their titles on there, Rainbow Six being one of them. Crash Bandicoot and Spyro are getting those re-releases, and you know the rights might be a little tied up, so that can be an issue. Now you can argue, well, if those are getting re-releases, I can kind of see why they're not on there, but at the same time you do have Resident Evil Director's Cut on there. But you don't have Resident Evil 2 on there. And yet Resident Evil got re-released a million times and even remastered and remade entirely. And then Twisted Metal 2, easily the best Twisted Metal game ever produced, is not on there, which is surprising. So yeah, there's a lot of people who are kind of upset with that list, but at the same time it also has some that you would expect, like your Metal Gear Solid's on there. So I mean, again, I feel for people who have an issue with it. But, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it was, there's a million different ways to play PlayStation games, and I'm sure this thing will get hacked, like, almost immediately, and then you'll be able to put whatever you want on there anyway. But I can see why the official list might disappoint some people. It also doesn't have a hook to it. Like, it doesn't really seem to have a thing that makes you go, oh, that's why I need that. Also, can we just throw out, like, how blatantly obvious it is that Sony stole this whole thing from Nintendo? Like, even down to the artwork of just someone, like, holding it in their hand. Like, it's embarrassing. And, I mean, to be fair, and not, I get accused of hating Sony, but I'll call it out for Sega, too. Sega did exactly the same fucking thing, with the Sega Mega Drive Mini or Sega Genesis Mini. Granted, in Sega's case, they were going to do it even worse. They were going to use ACT Games for a while and just do another one of those shitty emulator boxes they've been doing forever, until eventually, enough fan demand made them go like, come on, dude, fire ACT Games, which they eventually did, and they're going to do it differently now. So, but in general, I'm equal opportunity when it comes to hating these fucking things. Like, I'm glad that makes other people happy. That people are buying them, they're enjoying them, whatever. I get it. But you have to understand the effect that this is also having on other people. Like, so I was just in Toronto, right? And we went around to a bunch of video game stores that I've been to many times. We Got Games, which is run by a great guy named Kamal. Toy Rat, which is, of course, run by, well, I refer to him as Toy Rat as well. And there's some other stores, ANC Games in downtown Toronto. And this time last year, I was up there. And every business was booming. Everybody was killing it. Everything was great. And everybody was happy in the retro gaming scene. This year, every single one of these places is just kind of like, you get the vibe that something's wrong. And I've noticed this at various conventions too. The retro game boom is definitely dying. And that's, you know, for customers is a great thing because it's driving prices down, and I'm not arguing with that. But every single one of these people will always tell you that the issue is pretty much these classic machines because it's driving away demand. And, you know, a lot of people are just like selling off all their stuff in favor of these things. And that's the choice. I mean, that's how that's how things can go. And I'm not even arguing that's good or bad. I'm simply saying that it's having an effect. And the other effect is things like Nintendo going after ROM sites they haven't cared about for years because they're starting to see that their backlog of history has value to it. Again, you can argue that that's good or bad depending on your side in the matter. But yeah, there's just kind of it's. They're reselling you their history, for lack of a better way of putting it, and it is having an effect. And it's hard to say which side you might come out on that. I'm kind of in the side of that's kind of a negative, because it gives you less free roam to go around and get the originals the way I think that they were more obviously intended to be played, but also to hurt the aftermarket that came of that. But I can also see the opposite of that because people will say, well, good for you, man. Like now all the shit's going to be cheaper. So you can go out and get whatever you want and I can have this thing, which is totally right. And you have the convenience of getting it that way. So you ask me and it's kind of like I come 51-49 in favor of, you know, this is a bad thing, but it's really not that bad of a thing. So it depends on just where you stand. And I guess that's kind of the way I go is this is a more bad than good, but not by much. At least from my standpoint, but, you know, that's just me. I mean, there's going to be someone who says this is 100% good and 0% bad, and another person says, 100% bad and 0% good. Just how it goes. But back to what I was saying about the PlayStation Classic, one thing it's missing, to me anyway, is a hook. Now, this kind of shifts into our next subject, but kind of still stays on this one. When the Super Nintendo Classic came out, for example, it had this great hook of having Star Fox 2 on it. Now, Star Fox 2 had never been released. There had been unreleased, beta dumps of the game that had been out there for years. People were making repro carts out of it and all that stuff. But Nintendo finished up the game and then threw it onto there and said, this is the first time you've ever been able to play this, like in an official capacity. And already people, ripped it from there and then made like entire ROM, I have a repro cart of Star Fox 2 based on the ROM that came off of Super Nintendo Classic, made by my buddy Zebular. But, I said for the longest time that I thought that when the Nintendo 64 Classic ever came into existence, that the game that Nintendo would likely do that again with is a game called Sin and Punishment. Sin and Punishment was a Japanese N64 exclusive and made by Treasure, and it's extremely playable. I own the original cartridge of it, and I popped it in for a bit once I got it just to kind of see it, because I had heard a lot about this game, and it is actually a really fun game. There's a lot of shooting and stuff. It's actually very, very playable. Nintendo actually went so far as during the Wii's life cycle. On the Wii Shop, you could actually download that game on the American site, the American Wii Shop thing, and it was fully translated into English. So obviously they did all the work for that already. So I figured, hey, they've got this ROM, they even did the translation, they're going to put this thing into the Nintendo 64 Classic as like a selling point for the exclusive Japanese game you never got to play. So we'll get back to that in a second. But going to the PlayStation Classic, there doesn't appear to be anything like that. There's no like translated Japanese exclusive game or European game you never got to see or something like that. And I think that stuff like that would be a good hook. Although I'd be lying if I said I had some great example of what they totally should have included. Maybe like Pepsi Man or something. Granted, you probably couldn't do that for licensing reasons. But I'm sure they could have dug something up in there. But yeah, I'll admit freely that I don't have any great example of that. But circling back around to the N64, again, I'm not super into these, little clone console things. But when I was up in Toronto, my buddy Scott, the Canadian, is super into these things. Like, that's mostly what his setup is now, is just these little classic consoles. And he was super excited about the N64 Classic for a multitude of reasons, one of which I'll give him complete credit for. He says that, you know, because he follows emulation way more than I do, and he says that N64 emulation has really never been perfected. He's like, if Nintendo built this thing, this would be the first perfect Nintendo 64 emulator. And if it was hacked, then it would be like the ideal way to play the Nintendo 64. So he's just following that story. And as we're at Shane's place, at Re-Res Studios, a news story broke from the Nintendo UK that actually Nintendo went into their archives and updated their artwork for like 19 N64 games, which was, when you set that list aside, was essentially the definitive N64 list minus GoldenEye. And that one will not be part of the collection, I'm sure, because it's owned by 3 different parties. One part Nintendo, one part Microsoft, one part EA. Microsoft owns Rare, who actually developed the game, so they own assets. Nintendo owned the license to actually produce the game in the first place, so they still have that. And EA owns the James Bond game license. So even though they had nothing to do with that game whatsoever, they technically own the characters in it. So whatever. The odds of all 3 of them coming together is extremely unlikely. The only way I could see that happening is Nintendo and Microsoft have been talking. We know that they've been doing things with like cross-play and all that stuff. Plus, if this version of GoldenEye this is completely hypothetical right now. I'm just talking. But since those 2 parties are talking, it would not surprise me, since this little box is not owned by is not a direct competitor for Microsoft necessarily. As in, it's not a Switch game. It's not a Switch release. It would not surprise me if all 3 parties could communicate. I mean, EA likes money. You know, if they could take a paycheck just to have, you know, sign over their part of this, I could see this possibly happening, but I wouldn't bet on it. I think it's just too complicated to come to an agreement. The only way I could really see that working is, you know, if all 3 parties were willing to work together to just get it on all 3 of those platforms. But I don't think that will happen. But back to my point, one of the things that was on that list was actually Sin and Punishment. And I find that hilarious because I have been saying that for a long time. I think I said that ever since Star Fox 2 was announced for the SNES Classic. I think there's couple of podcasts where I actually said, like, I promise you if there's ever an N64 mini, that Sin and Punishment will be on it. So time will tell, but it looks like that might actually be right. So that would be cool. But yeah, all right, enough of this. Let's move on. Next subject up. So this I found kind of interesting. Not something I would ever actually use, but I did find this interesting. So it turns out back in 2015, Microsoft announced they would be giving keyboard and mouse support to the Xbox One. And then it kind of went silent. And it turns out that at the time I record this, they're only a couple days away from enabling it. So yeah, if you're into using a mouse and keyboard for your games on an Xbox, although why you're not using a PC at that point, I don't know. But if you're into that, that option will be there soon. Now, I guess certain games could certainly benefit from that. I have played games with a mouse and keyboard, and it's not my thing. I acknowledge that to everyone says like, oh, that's the most precise way ever. And I don't dispute that. I've seen it happen. It doesn't personally work for me, but I know that that's true. But that's not how I enjoy playing a game. But I know tons of people do. So, hey, more options. I'm always in favor of options for stuff. This is not a restriction. They're not taking anything away. They're giving you more choice. So I'm cool with that. Though that could theoretically lead to competition issues. Like if you have Xbox One users all playing Call of Duty and then like half that base is using a PC and mouse, they might just be infinitely better than the people with controllers. But, you know, cross that bridge when you come to it. One of the many reasons I don't really like playing online, as mentioned before, is just I don't, you know, when you play games online, there's always that guy who's like a bazillion times better than everybody, and it just kind of sucks all the fun out of it. I don't know. That's always been my experience with Save for One. I used to be that guy for Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I was that guy where I would just win every fucking time. That was the only game I was ever like that in. But yeah, I don't know. I've always found online game frustrating, and I think that is the kind of situation where it would also get to me. But, you know, that's just personal preference. If you're into that, then by all means, enjoy. Next little story here. So it looks like YouTube is coming to Switch. Nintendo Switch is not known for having a whole lot of apps on it. Not that we needed YouTube to appear on another device. I mean, it seemed one of those things that was kind of inevitable at some point, but I guess it is finally happening. YouTube is going to have an app for the Nintendo Switch, which is cool. I mean, would I realistically use it? Probably not much, but I like the option to have it there. You know, it's cool. But yeah, I really don't have much else to say about that because, I mean, you know, most of the time, if I'm going to take the Switch out somewhere, odds are I'm going to actually play on it. It's not really my ideal place to be sitting there watching videos. When it's docked, it's certainly not the way I would do it. Portably, it would have some sort of chance, but, you know, odds are in those situations, I also have a laptop or something, so I'm probably not going to use it, but it's not like it's not possible for me to use it, but that's just me personally. I don't represent everybody's lifestyle. There could be plenty of people who are like, this is now the greatest thing ever, you know, I don't know. But point is, like I said before, more options, more choices. I'm in favor of that. So yeah, YouTube coming to Switch. Cool. Next one up is and the rest of our subjects are not video game related. And this one is not even really entertainment related. This was just something I read about that I found fascinating. So it turns out last year, in Hawaii at, one of our, telescope research centers, I'm forgetting the name of it specifically, a very strange asteroid was discovered. They named I'm going to forgive my pronunciation, Oumuamua, the Oumuamua Asteroid. And the reason it's fascinating is they believe it's the first interstellar asteroid that has ever appeared within our solar system. And its shape is very unusual. Unlike being more of a ball, it's more of like a log, which means they don't know how it really got there. It literally was projected and shot from another solar system. And it takes a really long time to get through interstellar space. I believe the interstellar space definition is anything not considered within the solar system. So the sun has a certain radius. Anything inside of that is that solar system, but outside of it is interstellar space until you reach the next space of another solar system, another radius of a solar system. And we're not close to any other solar systems. So this one, they believe, based on what little evidence they have, is that it's shot from another solar system, and it's the first time one has been through. It's certainly the first time one has been through since humanity's existed, possibly even beforehand, because, I mean, the universe is fucking big. And it's one of those things that just fascinates me about science. I mean, you also get somebody... This news story was massively overblown, but somebody said something about how, it might be like an alien probe, and now they're actually like taking that seriously. It's like, I don't think so. But then again, it's not impossible. I mean, if you guys have known anything about the Voyager spacecraft, we made that, shot it up in the late 70s under President Carter. That thing just went into interstellar space like a couple of years ago. It was the first time anything humanity ever made it to interstellar space. Probably the best things human beings ever designed. It was able to take photos of all this stuff and get out to interstellar space and still send us messages. And it still communicates with us despite being no longer in the solar system, which is absolutely insane. So it's not impossible to say that some other society couldn't do the same. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's what this thing is. I'm just saying it wouldn't be impossible for that concept to exist. Do I think this thing is that? No, of course not. And I could be proven wrong. The only thing that makes this thing odd is the shape and the trajectory. We know it. We know, when I say no quotations, because I don't know personally, I'm trusting what scientists are saying, that this thing came from interstellar space, which just makes it unique. And the shape of it also makes it very unique. How would it get such a shape? That's not normal. So the suggestion therein is it was by intelligent design, but I doubt that too. But, you just don't know. I mean, it just could be the way the thing formed, and it's just how it is when it exploded off of something. You have no idea. But yeah, I just find stuff like that to be absolutely fascinating, and it really humbles you, because you read about any of that stuff and you just realize, like, we know almost nothing. We have such a small amount of information about the vastness of the universe. That's something that could just be as small as a fucking rock flying by. We just can't figure out. It just reminds you, man, the universe is big. It's much bigger than us. And I just found that kind of interesting. That's all. Moving on. This is entertainment related. Mike Myers appeared not too long ago on, I believe it was Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. Ugh. But he was talking a little bit about Austin Powers 4. He played Dr. Evil in a sketch. And then, of course, I think around then he was asked, like, what's the deal with Austin Powers 4? And he more or less gave a safe answer, like, it's looking good. We're looking forward to doing it. Like something like that. This subject is not so much to say, like, all right, guys, Austin Powers 4 is happening. Oh, my God. It's more like, do you want to see an Austin Powers 4? And just kind of like, what are your thoughts on the concept? Because here's my thinking. I would not be opposed to seeing an Austin Powers 4. It's been a long time since the character was around. I'm up to see what kind of adventure they could come with from that. Then I remember Austin Powers 3 being a really just a bad movie. It just was. I really like Austin Powers 1. I really liked Austin Powers 2. Not 3. And there's a reason that the franchise was kind of buried after that. That and The Love Guru buried Mike Myers' ability to be a lead man. If you look him up his IMDb history since then, he hasn't really been in much. Like, he's been in a couple of things. But that movie, like, understandably, like, really tanked his career. So his, like, he's been voices and cameos and stuff like that, but, like, his face being the prominent performer in something really hasn't happened since then. Austin Powers 4, from a career standpoint, is Mike Myers' basically last chance to get that back, to become like a leading man in something. Because I don't think anybody else is going to want him as a leading man still. Because he's been out of the spotlight too long now that, he can't just, hey, look, I'm just making a new movie. Like, it doesn't quite work that way. So I think if he does an Austin Powers 4, which I'm sure he wants to, I think that he recognizes that's his only shot, is to do it that way. So I think he needs that thing to go off without a hitch, and he wants it to be perfect, which is why will always say something encouraging, like, yes, we want it to be good and all that kind of stuff, because that's true. That everything rides on that. Because if that happens and it fails, it is over. There is no return. Because the only thing he's got going for him is the nostalgia pull of an Austin Powers 4. And I wish him luck, because I would love to see an Austin Powers 4, and I'd love to see Mike Myers appear in more stuff. I'm not knocking the man. I'm just acknowledging kind of what happened to his career, and I hope that I wish him well, and I hope that we do get an Austin Powers 4, and I hope it kicks ass. I don't want to see some weird like soft reboot or a passing of the torch story to a young Austin or something like that. Just come up with a cool story. I don't know exactly what it would be. I don't pretend to know that, but I would like to see it. But yeah, I guess that's kind of all I have to say about that. So would you guys want to see an Austin Powers 4? I'm very curious. Next up, one thing I never talked about really, I think I've acknowledged this briefly, but only recently did I actually see that trailer that kind of came out. The Joker movie that's coming up with Joaquin Phoenix. Sorry, I always forget his name. I remember his last name all the time, but never his first name. River Phoenix's older brother, or younger brother. I don't even remember what age they were. I know River Phoenix is dead, but Joaquin, I think, whatever. It's like a joke with me on my other channel. I legit can't remember his first name. But anyway, yeah, so they released like test footage or a test teaser, whatever, of him as the Joker. He's going to be in this movie where he's playing the Joker in like the 1970s. And it has nothing to do with the current DCU, and it has nothing to do with Batman, really. It's just kind of like this gangster movie, is my understanding, with him as the Joker. So at first when I heard this concept, I was like, oh, god damn it. Like, DC, you don't get it. Because DC movies and its whole universe thing has just been completely fucked. Like, utterly fucked. And as a film fan and a comic book movie fan, let me separate it because I don't really read comics, but I like the movies and the whole concept of all that stuff. It always kind of annoyed me that they were always just doing it so incorrectly. But so that this only upset me because I was like, they're not even trying to stay within that universe, blah, blah, blah. But as time has gone on, I've kind of thought about it some more, and I'm like, look, your DCU is completely broken. It can't be repaired. It was broken at its foundation. And it's kind of too hard to do a complete reboot, because if you did, you'd have to basically shut down all, DC movies for at least like 10 years to let everybody kind of forget about all of it and start fresh. So the only thing you can do is do what DC as comics was always pretty good at, which is telling a whole bunch of Elseworld stories. And by that I mean just a whole bunch of different comic book movies that don't have anything to do with each other, that are just telling like one-off adventures, kind of like the Warner Brothers animated division has been doing. Animated. I don't know why I said it so weird. The Warner Brothers animated division. They've been doing a whole bunch of that stuff. So there's not really that much of a reason a theatrical division couldn't do that as well. And it could actually lead to some really cool, like, random movies, because you would no longer be beholden to having to keep stuff within a certain continuity. In fact, you could even revisit other continuities. And what I mean by that is, who wouldn't love the idea of a Batman Beyond movie where Batman is Michael Keaton again? You know, are you familiar with the Batman Beyond storyline? It's basically, you know, Batman's in his like early 60s or late 60s, whatever. He's just too old to be Batman anymore. But, you know, Gotham still needs to be protected and all that stuff. And so he recruits this kid, and then the kid becomes the new Batman while he's just kind of the Alfred role. Dude, Michael Keaton would be fucking perfect in that role, because then you make the 2 movies he was in canon with that, and you can revisit that universe. I don't know. I think stuff like that could be awesome. Because you can bring back certain, you know, universes, like, you know, what about a Smallville reunion movie that's like canon, or not canon with its own original universe, but still gets to be a theatrical thing that's an Elseworld story. I would love to see all that kind of stuff. Now, whether or not that's bankable is hard to say, but this could be the beginning of testing those waters. Yeah, so in that sense, I guess I wish them well. Because, and I say this only because the DC universe failed utterly. If the DC universe was successful and they were still making this, then it would be kind of like Venom, where the Marvel Cinematic Universe is successful, but technically Sony has the right to make a Spider-Man spin-off movie without Spider-Man that will fuck up continuity. Let's release it. Then I'd be against it. So that's kind of where I stand with all that. Since DC doesn't have a functional universe anyway, then what the hell? Go nuts, basically, is my position. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll be out of here, is just some upcoming videos that I've got coming up. Obviously, this one is here. But depending on when you watch this, I've been trying to do... I have a Neo Geo CD cleaning video that came out not too long ago, or is about to come out, depending again when you hear this. I'm gonna be doing some stuff on some Hyperkin cables for Dreamcast and Xbox. I'm gonna be reviewing the retro AVS, which is a Nintendo NES replica that runs via HDMI. One of the few, like I said earlier, that I would actually, you know, recommend to anybody. I'm gonna be doing some stuff like that. Hopefully some more Dreamcast content, and of course Playload and things like that. And of course this month, in fact at the time you're listening to this, most of you, I should have a video on both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One's 5th birthday. So I hope you enjoy that. No Wii U this year. No point. There's only one game released for it. But yeah, that said, I think that it'll be a good month, and I'll stay tuned for December, where we'll have even more stuff. So thank you very much for everybody for watching. Thank you to everybody on Patreon for supporting. Thank you to everybody. Once again, round of shout outs here. Justin, Jonas, Corey, Jesse, Happy Gaming House, Rob, Luis, Bonilla, Luis, Michael, Eric, Trey, and Tim. Thank you guys. Thank you everybody who listened on Patreon. Thank you everybody who listened on the channel. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I'll see you all later.